Well, welcome everyone to the Masculine Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Tom Perez. I'm the founder and CEO of Epic Project, and this is an ongoing conversation primarily about men and the ways that they can influence the world for good. And one of the cool things about doing the work that we've done at Epic for almost 20 years now is it puts us in proximity to other organizations, other partners that are doing equally meaningful and important work. And today's another example of that. Jess Muñoz is the founder and CEO. Is that always going founder and CEO?
I'm the founder.
You're the founder. Okay. The founder of Hoʻoʻa, which is based in Hawaii. Just tell us a little bit about the organization, and then I have a whole list of questions for you that I'm really eager to kind of pick
Sure. Would love to. Thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate this opportunity. So I am a nurse practitioner by training, and about 17 years ago, I started seeing kids come into our emergency room, and they weren't being recognized as victims of exploitation. But instead, these youth were often labeled as truants, delinquents, runaways, substance users, and kids as young as 11 were being arrested for prostitution.
Yeah.
And as a nurse, I was like, this is crazy, and I started asking a lot more questions and realizing that so many of these children who'd been on the run were really kids that were running from situations of abuse and violence and ending up in the arms of abusers and being re-victimized by the system that was supposed to be protecting them. And so it became quick for me early on. It became really about how do we create a place of healing for kids. And, this was way before all the awareness that we have today. You wouldn't hear about this on TV. It wasn't in national news. Any talk about trafficking was overseas, not that it was happening to American children.
Right.
And so I realized that we can't just identify kids. We have to have a pathway to healing for them. And so I thought, okay, what do I do? Okay, I can create a place of healing. I had no background in nonprofits. I never knew anything about fundraising. And yet I was just so driven to make right what's been wrong and make sure kids can get healing.
Yeah.
And so ended up building our organization, Hoʻoʻa, and built out a comprehensive 13-acre residential treatment campus, first of its kind, for minors who've been sex trafficked, minor females. And with that, we also built out community-based programming, looking at prevention education, mentoring, group resiliency, care coordination, and then also we've done a lot of work around legislative changes and policies that have been needed to be put in place. So I'm excited to see the growth and the change that has happened, especially nationally. And when I look at just the tremendous momentum around awareness, it's exciting. Not that trafficking is an exciting issue, but I do believe that there are more people being mobilized. And so I'm very thankful and proud of our team who was on the front lines at the beginning before this was really well understood. So,
So
yeah.
all this from a nurse practitioner in an
Mm-hmm.
ER in Honolulu.
Hawaii.
Yeah, in
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah. That's quite a shift, I think, for you. Like, what was the moment, if there was one moment where you said, I can't not do something? Was there a particular moment like that?
I think there was obviously several kids that I had seen that kind of resurfaced through our emergency room. And I ended up seeing a lot of these kids in detention and hearing their stories and watching them go through this cycle. And I think I realized someone's got to do something. I've got three fingers pointing back at myself. This is not just about raising awareness, but really what is the solution to bringing those healing services and bright pathways of a journey that leads to life. And so I think that drive really came from I have obviously a strong faith background. And I
Yeah.
remember one day in particular, I was driving home from work and the sun was setting and it was casting shadows on Mount Kaala, which is the tallest mountain on Oahu. And I remember I was wrestling and saying, God, what am I supposed to do with all of this stuff? And I just felt this voice say to me, I've called you to shine the light in the darkness and watch new life come forward. I've called you to run into the darkness and bring the lost children home to a place of renewal and freedom. And there's a verse in the Bible in Psalm 63:7, which says, I'm free to run and play because you stood for me. And so for me, that has really been the driving factor is I didn't know how to do this. I didn't have a game plan. I didn't have a business plan. I just knew that this was the calling on my life and God would give me the wisdom of
Yeah.
what to do. And so it's just been a faith walk every single step of the way.
You talk about shining a light in the darkness, and when I hear that, I think of, the dark, gritty, back alleys and, dingy hotels and all those,
Yeah.
different places where this happens. It just strikes me as poetic, ironic, I don't know what, but like you have this idea of shining a light in the darkness because you're in a well lit, emergency room seeing
Mhm.
things and you were able to make that connection. What were the things that you couldn't shake, the indicators that you saw, and what were some of the questions that you started asking that led you to make this change, like from the view of a health professional?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a couple of things. One in particular was a lot of these kids would be brought in by police or child welfare for clearance exams to be placed either at detention or to be placed in temporary CPS custody.
Mm.
And what was interesting to me is, we were very pressured to, okay, do the clearance right, do the physical clearance exam and get them out. And I was like, but wait, I'm looking in their chart and they've been here multiple times for similar situations. And yet, why? And I would notice there wasn't really complex or a complete psychosocial history.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, what were you doing on the run and how have you been surviving and where did you leave from and what's going on with your family? And tell me a little bit about yourself. And so when I started making time to ask those questions and dig deeper beyond just, okay, maybe there was a broken arm or a scrape or a laceration or, whatever other signs of physical trauma, but really going, okay, there's a story here to be told.
Yeah.
And are we giving these kids an opportunity because we are seeing them in our emergency room, but are we hearing them? And we were not hearing them.
And you started asking why.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
um It's very similar to my own experience. I wasn't,
Mm,
in the emergency room, but I started asking um, why does this exist in the first place? And that drew me to look at men and men's culture and all of
mhm.
the things that, that lead to exploitation.
Yeah.
Um, the name you gave this work, what's the significance behind that?
Yeah. So in Hawaii, when we were looking to name the organization, you meet with a local respected kumu and you kind of share about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, the heart, the soul behind it, the values, the ethics. And so this amazing man and another woman, both very familiar with the Native Hawaiian culture, gave us this beautiful name.
Wow.
And Ho'olanapua means new life for our children. And what I love about that is really everything that we do from every program standpoint to every person that's involved in our organization, what remains central, even if you look at our logo, it's a child in the center.
Yeah.
And our whole purpose of existence, and for every single program we do, we ask ourselves, does this bring new life? Does this bring stability? Does this bring identity rebuilding? Does this bring safe relationships? knowing that it's not a linear process towards health and healing, but it does require the right environment. And it's not a moment, right? It's not, new life isn't a moment. It's a rebuilding of a child's sense of self, their connection to the people that are around them who do love them. And it's a understanding of, yes, these things have happened to me, but they have also helped me grow into who I am. And so our goal for every single kid that we work with is that their pathway, while might not have always been bright, but after encountering, those that work with us, our volunteers, that pathway would be bright, and that the opportunities for continued healing throughout their life would be possible.
Yeah, I'm as I think about your story that began in a sterile hospital environment, and hearing you describe what you're doing now, it sounds almost like a farm, like you're
Mhm.
cultivating
Yeah.
a place for kids to grow.
Yeah.
What is that? What does that new life look like for a kid that comes into your work, for that maybe grew up in the foster care or on the streets in Honolulu or something like that? What does that new life look?
Yeah. So, for the kids that go into our residential treatment program, which is called Pearl Haven, the process for being admitted, there's a lot of screening and assessments that we do because this program is 9 to 18 months. We have girls that are sent to us between the ages of 11 and 17 from across the country. And so, when a child comes into that program, we do our best to assess the needs from top to bottom that these kids have, and then set up a plan for healing and a plan for walking that transformational journey. It's uniquely designed to them, and they have ownership and they have agency over what that looks like. Yes, we have standard therapies that we offer. And, there is set programming, but for every child, we try to find that one thing that they can attach to. Kids who have been system involved youth, such as kids in child welfare, kids in juvenile justice, one of the things is they have a lot of broken attachments. And when
Mm,
you look at attachment theory, right, if you have many broken attachments, you are looking to attach to something. That is human nature.
yeah,
And so we want to create opportunities for healthy attachments and finding something that you're really passionate about or maybe good at. So we try to give lots of opportunities for music development, school development, science development, cultural arts, regular art, because we try to find that one thing that we can use to start building the self-esteem and creating healthy connection and relationship too. And our staff have a huge piece of this. Our programming is very relational. It's trust-based relational intervention is what we use. And it's really based around, you build the trust so that you can um, have the opportunity to provide correction and a way to make things right?
yeah,
Versus a lot of behavioral programs are like, well, let's deal with the behavior, right? That the aggression, the acting out. It's like, well, we take it a step deeper, which is, well, why? Where is this coming
there's that
from? And
culture. Yeah,
how can we provide the resource to work through that process?
yeah,
And what we find with these kids, the kids that have been through our program, is they're excelling in school. We provide schooling on site. They go from C and D students to A and B students. And so the power of education is so important because that is such a pillar, especially in a young child's life, for self-esteem
yeah,
and realizing, hey, I can actually do this. And so with all of those things that we offer, we also have a lot of experiential programming with surf therapy and with animal assisted therapy. And while not one intervention heals everything,
right.
there are all these different interventions kind of work to create the whole experience. And
Yeah,
so for every child, how they experience that, it's up to them, right? And so we give the opportunity, we invite them to engage, we invite them to go on this journey with us. We tell them they're never alone because they're not, but they have to do the work. We can't do it for them. And healing is hard.
yeah. Well, you
Healing
mentioned,
is hard.
yeah. you mentioned agency, and it occurs to me that a kid coming into your program who has been exploited and abused, like that's got to feel brand new for many of them. Like
Mhm.
maybe for the first time in their lives, they can actually make a decision for themselves.
Yeah.
How hard
Voice
is
and choice.
how hard is that for them to do?
It's definitely something we have to work on with them.
Yeah,
And so you'll see kids, especially kids who've been in multiple placements, they tend to get into a very compliance mindset, right? Well, I'm going to do this because I'm just going to be compliant because I'm going to get through this program. And so we try to break the compliance mentality. And it's really about like, okay, but no, we want to hear, what do you want? What do you like? How do we support what your goals and dreams and ambitions are? And sometimes they don't know right away, but because our therapists, our line staff, our counselors, our nursing staff, our program director, everyone is in alignment on the individualized treatment plan for each kid, and it grows and it changes over time. And
yeah,
sometimes we have to slow down and sometimes we can accelerate. But the first 6 months are truly about building trust.
yeah, yeah. That's just trying to put myself in the shoes of a kid showing up. So these kids are coming from all over, right?
Yes.
So it's not
Mhm.
just limited to Hawaii. I visited Hawaii for the first time in my life a couple years ago, and
Oh, awesome.
like everybody else I've ever talked to, fell in love.
Mhm.
It is paradise. Um, but you've obviously seen beneath the veneer of a, tropical paradise. What is important for people like myself? I mean, just outsiders to that island environment. What's important for us to understand about how things like tourism, economics, military, and history intersect with trafficking, with this issue? What's important for
Absolutely.
and about that?
So, it's interesting, right? Because if you think of first the geography of Hawaii, right? It is the most remote island chain in the world, but it is also the central gathering place of where the West and the East connect. And so, we have every installation of the US military. We have tourism, we have international and domestic business. We have, obviously our local communities and farming, and, there's a lot of those kinds of components. But I think because Hawaii is so beautiful and it's paradise, but I think that view that people have of Hawaii makes it also really easy to hide pain well.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Say more.
Yeah. Because if you think about, people come here to have vacation. They come here, the culture is beautiful, and the land, I call it the land of aloha, is amazing. I mean, it is so blessed. It's an amazing, amazing group of islands, and the people here love family and love each other. Um, but, there is a lot of generational cycles of abuse, violence, and trauma that have happened. And, you've had Hawaii wasn't a state until not that long ago. And so
Right.
there was an overthrow of the king and the queens and all of the things that have happened here. And so there are some inherent vulnerabilities. If you think about tourism, right? Tourism, you can be kind of anonymous. What happens in Hawaii stays in Hawaii. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, Hawaii is listed as a sex tourism destination. So it is known as a place to come, and there's an exoticness, right,
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. I
Um,
on my visit, just to that point, on my visit there, my, uncle and 2 of my cousins live there, and one of my cousins plays in a local band, and they played at a dive. I can't remember the name of it now. It's an Irish bar in downtown Honolulu, and
mhm.
we went to hear him play, and it was just a fun night just seeing that side of my cousin. But I was excited, and I texted a friend who is a survivor herself. I said, "Hey,
Mm,
I'm in Honolulu." I think I sent her a picture of the front door of the bar, and her response was kinda like, "Well, good for you. I was trafficked right there on that
yeah.
years
Yeah.
ago." So,
Yeah.
like, it's right beneath the surface. Right
It
beneath.
is. Well,
Yeah.
if you look at the history too, I mean, there was a red light district here in downtown Honolulu.
Yeah.
You used to have the police were the ones who managed kind of the red light district, and you had the ships pulling in, to port, and all the sailors would get off. And so there is kind of this, it's kind of not new, but it's just not looked at as, okay, well, this could be exploitation. It could be trafficking. And so I still think there's a little bit of that old mentality of like, well, this is just comfort women and, this kind of, we have the Korean hostess bars and we
Yeah.
have the illicit massage businesses. I mean, there is a lot, especially even around international trafficking and exploitation, that has kind of been happening for here forever. But I think what we've seen is, you've got the military, which I love the military and I'm so thankful for them, but it is also a big center of demand for
Yep.
us is as we see, that, and then obviously the tourism. And you mix all that with the vulnerability of our location, the generational trauma that is inherent here, and it creates this perfect storm for kids to be easily victimized, kids to be taken from here, kids to be brought here, kids to first be exploited by their families for drug money, rent money, gambling debt. But you have this market of demand that while the Hawaii is a state of the US, I've worked in Africa, I've worked in Cambodia, Thailand, Mexico, and you see the same almost, you just don't think this is the US when you start looking at exploitation and trafficking
Yeah.
through that lens.
And geography and
Yeah.
economics have a lot to do with that.
Hmm.
I heard you say, I don't know if you said it, if I heard you say it, or if I might have read this attributed to, but you mentioned like you have a justice gene. Like, and I get hearing your story, I totally get it. Like it's just like
Yeah.
deep in your bones, you have a sense of like right and wrong. So my question, I want to shift a little bit more towards the demand side of all of this. When you look at male demand and male silence in general around trafficking, what, if any, are or could be healthy expressions of justice that you wish men would start to
Mm,
advocate for
yeah.
more? Like what do you wish you would see out of not necessarily the men that are fueling the system by directly, demanding opportunities for paid sex, but the majority of men who aren't doing anything. Like, what do you wish they would do more of? What do you see?
So I'd say there's a couple things, right? And I am so thankful for men, and I'm so thankful for the men that have been in my life that have shaped me and helped raise me to the leader that I am and the person, the woman that I am. And, I mean, I think it all starts first and foremost with the family and the importance of a dad's role in a daughter in particular's life.
Mm.
When I look at and I listen to the kids that we work with on a daily basis, the common theme is this wound, right? And oftentimes it's a daddy wound. And it's whether dad wasn't there or dad was an abuser or, whatever that dynamic is or was. And I think culture nowadays has really pushed this whole sexualization towards our young people, especially girls.
Yeah.
And so if you're not getting that support and validation at home from your father, you're going to go look for it somewhere else. And when culture's telling you, well, this is how you're going to be popular and this is how you're going to be liked and this is what you need to have a guy in your life to take care of you and if you back all of that up, it starts at home. And I think that with men in general, for those who are fathers, the first thing you can do to be a part of this is to ensure your family is solid and show up emotionally,
Right.
show up physically, show up, spiritually, because that's going to be the biggest prevention to your daughter or your son ending up in these situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
That protective factor can't be underestimated. And so I think, that father piece is huge. And I think the other thing I'd emphasize is that, this really isn't about blaming and it's not about shaming, but it's really calling men to stand up in courage and to be accountable and to be protectors. The biggest advocates for our work have actually been dads of daughters.
Yeah.
And when I've asked them, why do you want to be involved? Because they say, I couldn't imagine if this happened to my child.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think for men in general, men who are obviously not the abusers and those buying sex,
Right.
um, it's really like we need men to hold other men accountable and not be okay with the locker room conversations and the bar conversations that are degrading of women and
Yeah.
girls.
Yeah.
And really not be afraid to say, hey, because if you back up all of this work that we are now fighting for and these kids that we are fighting for, culture has had such a heavy place in driving where we are today. And we have given into it
Yeah.
because we fail to stand up and
Yeah.
say, hey, that's actually not okay to say that. It's not okay to do that.
I know as a man myself, and I've felt this way for years since I first started learning about, what we're talking about here happening, right under our noses. It felt it felt overwhelming to know,
Yeah.
like, what can one man do? Because I'm not a cop. I don't have a badge and a gun. I don't have a platform. I'm just
Yeah.
a guy. What could I do? But you just said something that so many women, really wise women that I've met in my own journey, have said the same thing. It starts with something as simple as showing up. Just just being there. And I think
Mhm.
back as a dad. I have 3 grown daughters now, but I can remember when they were young, like, I swear half the time I had no clue what
Yeah.
to say or do, but I had, and I thank God for that, for this, like, I had this sense to go, I just need to be there.
Yep.
And just
Yep.
the fact of my physical presence, thankfully, was often enough, you know, at least from what my own kids tell me, like, just being there.
Well,
And
love is really spelled Time,
yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So there is something to do, and I appreciate you bringing that up because when we talk with men, it's this, I am like every man I've ever talked to. It's like, what can I do? It's so overwhelming.
Mhm.
But being able
Yeah.
to say, you know what? The best thing you can do to fight sex trafficking as a father is be with your kids, be with your
Yes.
family, show
Yep.
up. You're not, you don't have to wear a cape and act like some sort of hero. Just
Tough to be the dad from Liam Neeson and,
exactly. No,
Taken.
just drive the minivan and haul the cooler out to the soccer. That's what
Exactly.
right? That's good enough. So,
Mhm.
we talk about, you said something else that made me think of this. We talk a lot about masculine formation. I think there are places and spaces in culture that really, by and large, haven't been called into question, but there are places that form and shape men. And
Mhm.
I'm curious from your vantage point, if there are, you know, stories where you see some of these more, I don't know what I call, maybe malignant ideas about masculinity. Like, where do you see that show up in your work? Like, where, obviously it's the stories of kids, but are there any themes, any patterns that are especially harmful from what you see, just in terms of the way men show up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think over and over, what I've seen in all these years is there is a little bit of a sense of entitlement, kind of disconnection, and this concept that, well, to be a man means to, be rough and tough, and you have to be, kind of aggressive and harsh, and, you can do whatever you want, and kind of being this like very controlled. And what what I've seen with our kids, and especially the ones where their exploitation has started at home, right? It started with a dad or an uncle or a brother who had a really heavy porn addiction. And so then they become the object for that visualization, right? Then becomes the actualization. So now then you have this abuse and exploitation that's starting in the home, right? And that can be coupled with substance use, and it can be coupled with physical abuse beyond just the sexual abuse.
Sure.
And so you see what these kids are seeing and hearing is, well, that's just what dad does. That's what uncle does. That's what being a man is. And so that reshaping that we end up having to do with them and leading them through this process to health, healing, and almost a pathway to forgiveness,
Yeah.
because that abuse of masculinity has just not set well with them, right? And then it leads them out of the home into situations of very severe exploitation and trafficking as well. And
Yeah.
so, um, I think in a roundabout way, I know this is not a direct answer, but I'm trying to paint the scenario of what I think happens. And then, you tie in cultural elements, right? Of what does a particular culture, right? Hawaii is a very diverse culture, but there's a lot of cultural nuances with all of the different
Right.
uh, individuals that and communities here that come from different parts of the world, right? And so there's that redefining of what masculinity is needed, I think, across every sector.
Yeah.
Um,
You mentioned you said the P word. You said porn
oh
in
yes,
in this conversation. I it still amazes me, that there's still a lot of reluctance to see the connection. Obviously,
I know.
you see it from a very, authoritative standpoint. How do you, how do you help or how can you frame that connection in a way that's helpful, specifically for men? I think my hunch is women much more intuitively see the obvious connection, but how can you frame that connection, that might be more helpful for men to go, "Oh, yeah, these things are probably connected."
Yeah, so I think when you think about porn and you think about the way that it drives demand, it's training individuals. Porn trains people to objectify.
Mm.
It drives escalation and it disconnects you from impact, right? Because it is such a selfish thing.
Yeah, yeah,
It goes to the deep roots and of the darkness of your heart, right? And sadly, I think that it is so addictive and it has such a draw, right? Why do most therapists say it's very hard to recover from a porn addiction? Because there's that visual piece that is very hard to erase those memories. And so, we can all see that. Okay, that makes sense. But this underlying heart condition that it's also creating with this objectification, this escalation of like, I just can't get enough. Oh, this is not enough. I need to escalate it to this next level. You're not thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, this is what it's doing to me, but this is what it's doing to you
yeah,
subconsciously. And so, if demand is what is driving this entire system, and not all pornography is trafficking, but all trafficking is driven by demand.
yeah,
And
which is connect
that porn piece,
yeah,
if you look at just in Hawaii alone this year, we have had so many sting operations for online exploitation, right? Which it there's no way to prove that these men who've been caught are, have actually victimized someone in the past. Like they don't report that in the news articles. However, what it does show is that these men are online looking to have sex and looking to engage in conversation about having sex with children.
yeah, yeah,
That didn't start there. There is a pathway that led them there. And when you look back and you look at the research that is out there, it starts with that pornography addiction.
yeah. 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 It feels, and the ease with which we can access it now,
Oh,
anybody,
it's so crazy.
is so much easier.
Yeah.
I'm old enough. I mean, most of my life was pre-internet, so
Mhm.
I'm old enough to know what it used to be like. And,
Yeah.
um, and that was, just as a young boy myself, like I can remember, my first exposure to it was
Mhm.
on
Yep.
on top of a pile of dirty diapers in a dumpster behind the apartments. I climbed
Yep.
up, grabbed the magazine,
Uh-huh.
brought it home and stuffed it under my
Yeah.
bed. Now it's a click away.
Yeah, well, and you look at the history, right, too. So I have a friend who is an international attorney, and she's out of DC. Her name is Laura Letterer.
I know
She,
Laura.
yeah,
Uh,
she wrote an incredible book on the history of pornography. And
yeah,
you look at, what started as a Playboy has now grown into just very significant abuse, violence, degradation. And it's been forced to become this way because it's been driven by demand, that clearly that is what people want to see. Because
yeah,
if it wasn't, you wouldn't need to be gross and develop all of this disgusting content.
yeah, yeah, and it proliferates every day. Yeah. I'm tempted to go further into that, but my gut says we should talk about, um, a more life-giving side of your work. So I wanna shift just a little bit. Pearl Haven, that's the name of the residential facility.
Hmm.
It's Hawaii's first, is that correct? First
Yep.
residential campus. Um, what when a girl first arrives there, and kinda asking to put your trauma nurse hat back on, but what what is a young kid that comes onto that campus carrying in terms of
Yeah. I
trauma?
love that.
What are yeah, what is she carrying? What does that look like? How do you process that even from a clinical perspective,
Hmm.
because there's some
Yeah.
physical realities you have to deal with. So what does that look like?
Right. So you obviously see the complex trauma, right? The complex trauma, it's not the traumatic episode that happened once. It's a culmination of multiple types of trauma. And we often see it's not just the trafficking, exploitation trauma. That's like the secondary trauma. It is really a lot of the abuse and violence from home
Yeah,
and from what
million.
their early childhood was. They come to us with a dysregulated nervous system. They are just trying to adapt. They're hypervigilant. They're disassociative. They have severe attachment wounds, like we talked about.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I always like to say they don't arrive broken. They arrive adapted to survive.
Oh, that's so
And yeah, because if you sit in adaptation of survival, right, you're still living in fight and flight.
yeah,
You're surviving. You're not broken. Like these girls, if they were so broken, they wouldn't be alive. So I tell them their hope can blossom at Pearl Haven. It doesn't begin at Pearl Haven because if they didn't have the hope, they wouldn't have made it through to
yeah.
where they are.
That's
So,
Say more about that because that is a nuanced thing in this work that I don't think a lot of people who aren't daily in the weeds like you are understand that because you're really there is something amazing about any person that survives, this kind of abuse. Like, and you're calling that out. Can you say more about maybe help us think differently about who these survivors are?
yeah. So if you think about what constitutes what has made up I'll just give kind of a generalized picture of what these kids have gone through, right? Most kids have gone through so much abuse and rape, right? And whether that started at home and then progressed outside, but you're looking at hundreds of times
Mm,
of experienced sexual violence. One time being raped could be traumatic enough, and you see people commit suicide from that, right? They have gone through multiple times of that.
yeah,
That shows resilience that they're still alive. They
yeah,
might not be surviving in a healthy way because they're disassociated and
right,
triggered by things right and left, but they survived. They've survived homelessness. They've survived not eating at times. They've survived drug overdoses. They have survived manipulation from family members, from the system that hasn't listened to them.
Yeah.
They continue to show up every morning not knowing what that day is going to hold. So when we bring them into consistency, safety, predictability, regulation, healthy relationship, a lot of our work is taking initially those behaviors, right, of fight and flight and trauma, and it comes out in
Adaptive
all
behavior.
sorts of different ways, right? So
Yeah.
we're dealing with behavior, which is the language of trauma, and trying to start to peel back the layers and layers of the onion
Yeah.
and tackle one thing at a time. But what I think we often forget is underlying all of that is the common thread of generational trauma and
Right.
violence
Right.
that they experienced oftentimes even before they came out of the womb. And that gets overlooked
Yeah.
because that is not always easy to see. It doesn't manifest in a way that, is super obvious. But when you start peeling back those layers, it will start to come out. And that is the deep healing work
Yeah.
that we are trying to accomplish at Pearl Haven is, yes, there were all these things and they're horrible, but underlying all of that, let's get to the root so that we can change a generational outcome. And these girls, because they are so resilient and they have survived so much, it is almost their ability now to create that generational shift and leave that legacy that this stops here and this stops now.
That's so beautiful the way you express that. I'm haunted
Thank
though
you.
hearing you describe the trauma picture that is a kid that walks into Pearl Haven, and that compared to the picture on Skip the Games or OnlyFans,
Mhm.
websites that are selling sex. That's a very different picture that you
Yeah.
when you're on those websites trying to buy a person is such a difference.
Yeah.
For the for the I would say for the kid in the back of the class, which was me often, can you give us a quick study or quick course on trauma informed care? What are the most important things we need to understand when we hear that phrase? Because it is kind of a buzzword. It's
Oh
what
gosh. I think most people don't know what that means
it's so.
because it's
Yeah,
just thrown around.
can you unpack that a little bit and for the kids
Yeah.
in the back of the class?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the whole concept of trauma informed care has really come to light in the last 20 years. If you look at historically how even people in health and human services, we would want to approach things with, okay, let's get them the services, let's get them the programming, let's do all of these things. And in the midst of doing the things, there's still an approach, right, of looking at every single thing we do, every modality we want to integrate as having a trauma informed lens, knowing that trauma is complex and there's multiple layers. And so the way we approach it relationally, the way we approach it with not us telling them what they need, but really listening to the survivor telling us what they need. And we're the ones who need to figure out, okay, how do we make that possible? So I like to, we've used a lot of this as well with law enforcement, right? Because historically there hasn't been a lot of understanding, right? That people who are getting caught up in the system, there's a lot more going on than just the behaviors they're saying. So I will say again, behavior is the language of trauma. And so when you start looking at how people react, think of your own family, think of friends that you have, right? Everybody has stuff that's in there. And so the way they react and saying, well, what's wrong with you? That's not the approach.
Yeah.
It's, wow, what's it like to be you right now? That's got to be a lot. You're carrying a lot. So I like to refer to trauma informed care. And when people say that, I like to challenge with, are you trauma informed and integrated care?
Mm.
Have you integrated that lens across everything that you do, from activities of daily living to the therapy, the therapeutic lens of being in with your therapist to how do we, for us, right, in residential, how is it in the cafeteria, right? How do we create the environment that leads to health, healing, and flourishing for each child that we're responsible for? Down to the little things. If you ever get to come to Pearl Haven, you'll see the colors that are on the wall, the art that is on the wall,
Yeah.
the sounds that come from the facility. All of those things we look at through a trauma-informed lens is how does this bring regulation to a nervous system? How does this allow the silenced voice to be heard? How am I as a staff and with all of our staff, how are we showing up every day to carry that lens of looking at the whole person,
Yeah.
body, mind, spirit, and emotion?
Does that perspective, that trauma-informed lens that you speak of, does that or should that change expectations on the part of therapists, people working with survivors? Does it how does that change our sense of how quickly things should change? How the amount of time
Absolutely. Yes.
it's
Yeah.
yeah
It is. And it goes along with what I said earlier, right? Healing and trauma is not linear. It is oftentimes up and down. It can be circular at
yeah
times. So understanding that piece, I think, is really important.
yeah
That every journey is that individual's journey. And so we have to look for ways to bolster, support, and help them towards their goals. And that's why I think one of the biggest things we do from a trauma-informed lens is give these kids agency. Because oftentimes our system of care and kids who've been in the child welfare juvenile justice system, they've been told, oh, I'm the adult in your life. I've got it handled. I'm going to take care of you, whatever that is.
yeah
And we've let them down, right? So then we ask them to trust us. So they've been traumatized by the system. They're traumatized by the people who've also just directly abused them. And so how do we make sure that even when we're being intentional to help, that we're looking at that through the lens of, okay, but how could this be misperceived as exploitive or as lying or as, we're breaking trust,
yeah
right? And so um, it's a new way of operating.
yeah
And
yeah
it's hard. I mean, it's hard when you work with minors as well, because there's so much regulation, right? And there's things that are out of our control. But that transparency, authenticity, when those kids experience this, their ability to open up and start to do that healing work and to feel safe enough to do that healing work exponentially grows.
yeah again, I still say it again, the strength it takes to simply survive is it's that kind of fortitude. I've not seen that in many other places in my own life. I know one of the things that is a constant struggle for us in the work that we're doing on the other side of on this issue and trying to engage men is most men don't do this. Most men don't buy sex. It's driven.
Yeah.
Trafficking is driven by demand, but it's not a majority of men that are
Mhm.
most men will never do it, but the problem we run into with those men is, well, I'm not doing it, and like that's enough. That like
Yeah.
what we try to do is get them to see the bigger picture. That it's not just not doing it. What are you doing to?
Yeah. How are you taking action?
How are you taking action?
Yeah.
What have you learned in working with the men in your community and around the state of Hawaii or just in general? Like, where do you see men showing up in ways that are really really helpful
That's
in
a great
this effort?
question.
Yeah, where do you
That's a
see that?
great question.
Where do you
So
want
I've
to see
seen,
more?
yeah. So the men who've made the biggest difference that I've seen personally are those that have used their influence, who fund solutions and are okay to have hard conversations.
Talk
And
what would be a hard conversation in that respect?
it would be willing to talk about this with their friends, with
Mm,
their colleagues, with their bosses,
yeah,
with influential people in the community. We all pay taxes. And so having men that are not afraid to go to the city council and the school boards and to government leadership and saying, hey, as a father, as a parent, as a brother, as an uncle, as a concerned citizen. Here's what I see, and here's how I'd like to help be a part of this change.
Yeah.
I think it's not just about avoiding harm, but actively building healing. And,
Oh,
even if
say,
you're not
say
comfortable.
that again. That's so good. Say that one more time. I love that.
So I don't think it's just about avoiding harm, but being active in building healing.
I love.
That's what we need men to do. We
Yeah.
need them to bring healing to their families, as we discuss. And that's not just their immediate, extended family,
Yeah.
too. Be the leader
Yeah.
in your family
Yeah.
and making sure that these conversations are being had, and be a part of the solutions. If you don't want to talk about porn and the demand side, that's fine, but then be a part of the healing side.
Yeah. Yeah. That is some of the most helpful and clarifying advice I've heard in a long time. I really appreciate that. I want
Yeah,
to.
I just think men need to, if you're listening to this and they're following you, Tom, have that one real conversation. Use your voice. Invest in a solution. You don't have to do everything, but please do something, because there is such power when men rise up.
Yeah.
And I think culture has, I'm not a fan of the demasculinization and the way we've put men in a box.
Yeah.
Let's thrive. We want men to thrive
Yeah.
as well. We want them to flourish. We talk about women flourishing and women having all this, but our balance is having men do the same thing.
Yeah, I've said many times that men cannot flourish without the full flourishing of women. Like
Yes.
it's not a zero sum game, right?
Hmm.
Those things go together. So I so appreciate the wisdom and the note that you strike in all of this. One, just a couple of just final questions. This is hard work, you know that. I feel like you jumped from the frying pan to the fire from being an ER
The
nurse.
power of ignorance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But what?
Being naive, I should say.
Yeah, that's my story too, or as I call it, just dumb enough to try.
Yep.
Uh,
Same. And
yeah,
too determined and stubborn to quit.
yeah. What is for you at this season of life? What is life giving for you?
Oh, one of the most life-giving things for me, because, when you work in the darkness, you have to spend triple the amount of time in the light.
Yeah.
And spending time with my nieces and nephews,
Mhm.
I don't have any kids of my own, personally, but spending time with them, and they're still quite young, it just reminds me that there is still innocence out there.
Mhm.
And it reminds me why I fight for kids in general. So I think spending time with them, and then also, for me, it's being out in community, in on the trails, hiking in the water, surfing. I'm not the best with self-care. I'm still a work in progress with that, but remembering that not everything is dark. And I
Yeah,
think sometimes this work can feel that way, and it's overwhelming, and you're just like, man, are we ever going to make progress?
yeah,
And I'm always just reminded, when you think of like Corrie Ten Boom or Abraham Lincoln, it's that one life at a time. It's that one change that you can bring at a time. And so, I have to remind myself of that. And I keep making sure that, at the end of the day, I know I don't carry all of this. This is
yeah,
God's to carry. And
yeah.
it's his change and transformation. And all I need to keep doing is showing up and being faithful. But at the same time, I think you and I both know that what is going to change this is the heart of man
Mhm.
being changed and finding redemption, which, that's a hard thing
Yeah,
for a lot of people to understand. But at the end of the day, this is a spiritual battle, 100% spiritual battle.
yeah.
And we have to reclaim this territory. And it takes all of us
It,
stepping in shoulder to shoulder with
yeah.
our shields.
It's interesting because I've heard people, inside the church and faith communities and outside,
Mm-hmm.
public and private say similar things like this is evil. Like that's
Yep.
a theological label, you know,
Yeah.
and no one disagrees with that. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is truly truly that. Want to give you the last word. I want to go old school though with it and ask you if you would, and you could just restate so many of the things you've already said in this conversation. But I would you would you be willing to give a benediction to men? Just leave us with advice, a request, a question for us to ask. But would you speak to men? Just take the last few seconds.
Yeah. No, thank you. I believe men in our world and in our communities have a beautiful opportunity to find their purpose, find their passions, and be a part of this change. Because as women, we can't do it on our own. We don't want to do it on our own. We want to be collectively a society that cares about children and that we care about not just them being quote unquote rescued, but that we believe in their healing because without that, there isn't justice.
Mm,
And I just want to encourage the men listening, get involved. And
mm,
whether it's with this, but just get involved in something. Use your skills and talents and influence to make the world a better place, the community you live in a better place. And most importantly, invest in your home life,
mm.
invest in your family life, because that at the end of the day, that is your legacy. And I'd ask you, what is that legacy that your life is painting and is going to leave with your family?
And the people said, Amen.
Amen.
Jess Muñoz, you're a blessing. Appreciate the work
Mhm.
you do and the way that you do it. Thanks for taking this time.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. And thank you for the work you do. And, we're honored to partner with you guys. We would love the opportunity to connect with listeners who want to learn more. And, I always love good conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.